In the last chapter, we saw that Andromalius decided to get rid of little Palmerian. But just when he was about to carry out his plan, Osiris appeared and asked him what he was doing here. Andromalius thought he had been caught in the act, so he lied to Osiris, telling him that he was taking care of Palmerian because there were no maids when he arrived at the garden. Luckily for him, Osiris believed his lie and asked him to keep this a secret from Hugo, since if he found out, he would explode with anger. Then he touched Andromalius' arm and asked him not to exert himself too much. At that moment, memories of Set came to the demon Andromalius' mind, so he quickly left the garden with the excuse of having something important to do. Hugo was not the only person who was changing thanks to Palmerian, but Osiris was also starting to change after seeing how Hugo, an extremely cold person, had started crying. After that day, Hugo never stopped being by Palmerian's side, leaving no opportunity for Andromalius to get rid of Palmerian. But since there was still plenty of time before the door opened, he decided to end Palmerian's life in a much crueler way than Roxana and Penelope's, so that Hugo would suffer even more from the loss of a loved one. Andromalius was very careless, so Vikir followed him into the cave, and using the Beelzebub sword, he made a crack in the barrier created by the most powerful demons and entered inside, where he came face to face with Andromalius. Once he realized that Vikir knew everything, he decided to stop hiding his true nature. He attacked Vikir, but he defended himself using the Beelzebub sword and cut off one of the demon's hands. While Andromalius was writhing in pain, Vikir revealed to him that he also knew about the existence of the 10 demons who had come to the human world to open the door to the demon realm. Andromalius quickly realized that Vikir's soul smelled like demon blood because he had entered hell. With a demonic smile, Vikir revealed to him that he was not going to let him die peacefully. Before continuing, don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any new videos. On a normal day like any other, while people were walking happily, this happiness did not last long. Before Vikir regressed, despair came to the peaceful world. The gates connecting the demon world and the human world appeared in the sky. This moment was remembered as the moment when the invasion of demons had begun. People called it the Fall. The 10 high-ranking demons who descended first into the underworld were responsible for opening this gate. These demons were known as the 10 elite corpses. In Vikir's previous life, amidst a long and arduous war against the demons, he encountered one of the 10 elite corpses. While he was injured and leaning on his sword for support, he looked up and saw a demon appear on the cliff. The impact of the demon's appearance was devastating, as out of a total of 671 people who participated in the battles, 666 died, 5 survived, 4 were left unconscious, and only 1 survivor was able to see the demon. While the demon was approaching Vikir, he fell to his knees, and as he stared into his eyes, his expression changed drastically as he began to feel terror. The reason why the demon had let him survive was simply a whim of the devil wanting to equalize the number of dead to 666. The demon turned around, and while his body emitted an evil aura, he spread his wings and left. The only thing Vikir remembered is that the overwhelming strength of the high-ranking demon from the 10 elite corpses was pure destruction. While he was staring into Andromalius' eyes, he began to wonder who would have thought that he would come across one of those 10 elite corpses approximately 10 years earlier. As Andromalius covered the wound on his arm with his hand, he looked into Vikir's eyes, and upon seeing his expression, he started to wonder what he was thinking. Looking to the side, he saw the remains of skeletons of children that had been devoured by the demon. Upon closer inspection, he noticed that some bones were still covered in blood. He began to wonder if these bones belonged to the young children that Andromalius had devoured. Upon seeing this scene, he couldn't help but get angry, while his body emitted a murderous aura. He stared into Andromalius' eyes with a killer look. Slowly, he began to rise from the ground, placing his left hand on his chin, and while staring into his eyes with a demonic gaze, he smiled and asked if he felt anger upon seeing the remains of the children. Andromalius showed him his hand. Several fingers of his hand began to transform into parts of the children that he had devoured. The pinky finger transformed into a child's mouth, the ring finger transformed into a nose, the middle finger transformed into hair, and the index finger transformed into skin. He asked Vikir not to worry as the children were alive and breathing inside his womb. He also added that he could revive them if he wished. He began reciting words in the language of demons, causing the bodies of the children to slowly emerge from his own body. At first, Vicar simply stared at Andromalius, trying to understand where he was going with this. The disfigured faces of the children appeared on Andromalius' body, and they started begging for help. Upon seeing this, he couldn't help but become enraged, and using the Beelzebub sword, he cut off his only remaining arm. While Andromalius was watching as his sword approached, he was unable to do anything about it. He fell to the ground on his knees and began writhing in pain, as Beelzebub's sword had damaged his soul. Vicar looked at Andromalius and started enjoying how he was twisting in pain. Then he told him not to worry about the children since the dead cannot come back to life. Seeing that both of his hands had been cut off, Andromalius looked down at the ground with a worried expression and began screaming due to intense pain. At that moment, his body began to emit a demonic aura and the 2 hands he had lost regenerated. He stared into Vicar's eyes and with a smug smile, explained that the regeneration had been completed. Andromalius stood up from the ground and while looking down, started dusting off his pants. He told Vicar that he understood that they both had many hidden things. Vicar simply remained silent and didn't say a word. Then Andromalius called him a genius, since even Osiris had only managed to reach the level of graduate at 30 years old, and he had achieved this at the young age of only 17 years old. It was clear to Andromalius that he had become an unparalleled irregular. Andromalius extended his hand to the side, causing it to slowly start changing shape. He thought that now that Vicar had the Beelzebub sword, the sword of the Lord of Demons, it was likely that he would become a future risk factor for demons. Several seconds later, his hand transformed into a sharp sword. He pointed it towards Vicar and while staring him in the eyes, he smiled and revealed that he was going to kill him here and now. Upon hearing this, Vicar unsheathed the Beelzebub sword. While looking at him with a murderous gaze, he promised to kill him to avenge all the children he had devoured. The two stared into each other's eyes for several seconds, creating tension in the air. Then the battle began and they both started attacking each other using their swords. Vicar stared Andromalius in the eyes and started attacking with the Beelzebub sword. But to his surprise, Andromalius effortlessly blocked all of his attacks. With a diabolical smile, Andromalius began to counterattack. But Vicar was able to block all the attacks effortlessly. He stared into his eyes and with a smile thought that Vicar's second name was Van, and his own was Love, so there was a significant difference in power between them. The rule where collateral line and legitimate children could only learn up to the 4th technique. He attacked Vicar, causing him to step back due to the difference in strength. He thought to himself that he couldn't defeat someone like him who was capable of using the 6th technique. Andromalius used the 6th Baskerville technique and launched a barrage of cuts. Little by little the attacks began to advance towards him. At first, Vicar simply stood there watching, but several seconds later, while his eyes were shining, he used the 6th Baskerville technique and was able to block all the attacks. Seeing this, Andromalius was dumbfounded and started wondering how Vicar knew about the existence of the 6th Baskerville technique. He smiled as he expected Vicar to have something else hidden. At that moment, part of his face began to transform into a flexible and sharp sword. While staring into his eyes, he smiled and used both swords to attack him by surprise. He blocked the sword attack from Andromalius' hand using the Beelzebub sword, but slowly the flexible sword started getting closer to his eye. With a murderous look, he glanced at the sword, and at that moment, the blade of the Beelzebub sword began emitting intense mana. Upon seeing this, Andromalius' happy expression drastically changed to surprise. The mana that the sword was releasing was so intense that it even made his hair start to fly. Vicar used the 7th Baskerville technique and counterattacked with a powerful strike against Andromalius, causing his sword to break in half and fly backwards. Vicar's attack hit him in the abdomen, causing him to start bleeding from the mouth. He began to wonder how someone like Vicar could know the 7th Baskerville technique, a technique that only the head of the Baskerville family was allowed to use. Vicar gained momentum and started advancing towards him at high speed. He stared into Andromalius' eyes with a murderous look while Beelzebub's sword emitted an intense aura. He attacked Andromalius in the abdomen using the sword. This attack was so powerful that it even created a large curtain of smoke inside the cave. Several seconds later, the curtain of smoke began to disappear, and it could be seen how Vicar had stabbed the Beelzebub sword into the demon's chest. While he was writhing in pain, Vicar told him that demons always thought they were superior, and looked down on humans. He approached and while looking into his eyes, smiled and mocked him by revealing that there was nothing easier to deceive than a cunning demon. Andromalius looked into his eyes and clenched his teeth tightly, as he couldn't believe that a mere human was mocking a demon like him in this way. The heroes who had closed the door and put an end to the era of destruction. In the end, they hadn't been able to find the 10 superior corpses to condemn them completely. But now it was different because the fall had not yet begun. He was in an era where the 10 elite corpses were still preserving their power and didn't want to show it to humans. Vicar approached Andromalius' ear and revealed that he had already understood everything. Upon hearing this, he became quite confused as he didn't know what Vicar was talking about. Andromalius became somewhat confused and looked at Vicar with eyes of surprise. He explained to him that the plan of the demon disguised as Set was to connect the human world and the demon world, which meant that if he ruined the plan by killing the 10 demons, the fall would never come. Vicar's body began to emit intense mana. He stared into his eyes and with a murderous look, he told him that if he killed the 10 demons, then his heart would feel somewhat relieved. Upon hearing this, Andromalius' expression changed drastically to fear. He started wondering why he felt afraid of a simple human. When thinking about this, he clenched his teeth tightly and started getting angry, and at that moment, he called Vicar a cursed human and his body began to emit a demonic aura. Vicar realized that something bad was going to happen, so without thinking twice, he moved away from the demon. At that moment, Andromalius' body transformed into a red ball made of blood covered in thorns. Vicar moved several meters away and abruptly stopped using his hand. While staring intently at Andromalius, he began to wonder what those thorns made of blood were. Little by little, the thorns started getting smaller until finally several seconds later, the legs of the demon Andromalius became visible. He asked Vicar who would have thought that Andromalius would show his true form in front of a human. Vicar simply stared and didn't say a single word. Several seconds later, the blood-made ball disappeared and Andromalius appeared in his true demon form. He had 2 horns, sharp teeth, sharp claws, and goat legs. With a diabolical smile, he stared into Vicar's eyes and revealed that this was his true body. He extended his hand and admitted that his strength had been quite surprising to him. Vicar simply listened and didn't say a single word. At that moment, Andromalius extended his hand towards him and all the fingers of his hand transformed into devilish snakes. Little by little, the snakes began to advance towards Vicar. At first, he stood still for several seconds, but then he used Baskerville's 7th technique and with the Beelzebub sword, in the blink of an eye, he cut off the heads of several snakes that were being controlled by the demon. Although he had lost several snakes, Andromalius was not willing to give up. So with a diabolical smile, he extended his other hand towards Vicar, causing more snakes to appear and start advancing towards him. The snakes attacked him again, but he once again used the 7th technique and in a flash dodged their attacks and cut off their heads. While he was busy dodging the attacks, a snake appeared from behind and started moving towards him at great speed. Vicar was unable to sense the presence of the snake, and in the blink of an eye, the snake bit him hard on the shoulder. Feeling the pain, he quickly turned around and using the Beelzebub sword, cut off the snake's head. At that moment, Demon Andromalius began to smile and stopped attacking with snakes. Then he stared into his eyes and while having one hand resting on his waist, extended the other hand and revealed to him that the battle had already ended. Upon hearing this, Vicar touched the part of his shoulder where the snake had bitten him and asked Andromalius what he was talking about since a wound like this meant nothing to him. The demon Andromalius opened the palm of his hand and as he emitted an evil aura, a demon's mouth appeared in the middle of his palm. He used infinite blood absorption, causing Vicar's blood to slowly flow out of his body through the fang wounds inflicted by the snake. Vicar became quite confused as he didn't know what was happening. Andromalius extended his hand towards him, causing the demon's mouth to start sucking all the blood that was coming out of Vicar's body. He approached his hand to his head, and while with the other hand he was sucking Vicar's blood, he looked at him intently in the eyes and with a smile revealed to him that his ability allowed him to control blood. He also added that his abilities were absolutely invincible when fighting against living beings. While Vicar's blood was shooting out of his shoulder, he simply stood there with a murderous look. At that moment, Andromalius revealed to him that all the blood from his body was going to spill out, leaving him dry. He was the 10th corpse called Andromalius. His risk level was S+, the size was unknown. The discovery location was deep within the Gate of Destruction, known as the Snake's Womb. The alias of this demon was the 10th corpse, a natural enemy of humanity, one of the 10 disasters known as incomprehensible and impossible to kill. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video.